Hi guys, and welcome back. Whether you're joining us for this YouTube video or this Beyond Body podcast episode, I'm so glad you're here with us. This is going to be a really valuable chat that we're going to be having today, and a really valuable guest who I know you're going to get a lot out of, which is why I wanted to share it across as many platforms as possible. Today, we're going to be speaking to Jalissa, who has been documenting her recovery over on Instagram, and in doing so has stumbled across a very strong talent and ability as it relates to advocating and being an activist in this recovery space, particularly advocating for marginalized groups and the representation and elevation of marginalized voices within this space. I wanted to talk to Jalissa about a couple of different things. First and foremost, obviously, what needs to be done to ensure that we are supporting, elevating, and spotlighting marginalized voices, and some really solid advice for anybody who is in a position to be able to do that. But I also wanted to speak to her about what it's like to actively recover within the recovery community online as it is right now. When I went through recovery, you really had to go searching, and much of that was on Tumblr. The recovery community was not really an established thing at that point, and we certainly didn't have the diverse voices and representations that we're starting to see more and more of, and that has been established for some time. And so it's really of interest to me as someone who's now working in the space to know what is helpful and what is unhelpful to someone who is currently actively recovering in this area of support and activism online. And so we dive into that, and I think that's really valuable for people navigating recovery and trying to use this online community as a source of support and connection without the potentially harmful aspects of it. And it's just always a joy to speak to Jalissa. We have been in contact on Instagram privately for a long time. She's such a light in, my online community, and always has been. And she's in her late teens, but that will surprise you as much as it always does for me with Jalissa, because she has a wisdom and a viewpoint and an ability to articulate that viewpoint which goes well beyond her years, which is why I think she is so valuable in this space. She can really speak to an experience from her age group that is really well put and really well communicated. So I think she's going to do amazing things. All of her details about where you can find her will be in the show notes or the YouTube video description. Please go and follow her and show her a lot of support. And I'm just so grateful to her for coming and joining us today. So thank you, Jalissa. Thank you for your friendship and your support, and for being generous in sharing your story here today. And of course, thank you for all of the hilarious photoshopped photos that you send me of us together in a post-COVID world. Hopefully we'll be able to make that come true at some point. Okay, guys, enjoy, and go and show Jalissa a lot of support. So Jalissa, thank you so much for joining me today. I think that yours is a perspective that is so valuable when we're talking about recovering whilst in the recovery community, which is so vast and so established. As a professional, it's so important for me to understand the impact of the recovery community, both the pros and the cons, because it's been a long time since I was recovering in the community, and it's a totally different landscape. I think your experience and your voice about marginalized groups within the community is really valuable as well. So I really appreciate you coming and chatting to us about that today, both on the channel and the podcast. So thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I know we've talked about this before, just like these full circle moments. I've mentioned to you like multiple times that I've watched you since I was around 13 or 14. So it's really cool to be on the other side of that and being one of the people that gets to talk to you and gets to share my story and my area of activism. So I'm very thankful, and thank you again.
It's amazing. It's such a cool full circle moment for me too, because I remember when we first connected and I said, Jalissa, I know who you are. I've seen your name in my, comment sections and my notifications for so long. And now to see you taking your space in this area of activism is amazing, and you're making such an enormous difference. So always so excited to support people who've got to this place themselves. It's incredible. So speaking
Yeah.
a little bit about that story and your background before we get into kind of the topics for today, do you want to give everybody who's watching and listening a bit of background about your eating disorder, but particularly your recovery and where you are currently? What sort of brought us to be speaking together today?
Yeah. So my eating disorder and disordered eating started around age 10. I was an actress, a figure skater, and a dancer all at the same time. And I had just gotten back from a acting convention in LA, and I came back to Dallas where I live. And my acting coach had told me that she thinks I would be more successful if I had lost weight and just gotten a little smaller to be more like cast director friendly and all of that jazz. So I needed to look the part in order to be more successful and get those roles. So I was like, okay, I'll do that. And I'd always been kind of self-conscious of my body, especially like growing up in a predominantly white area, still being in one. I had always noticed that my family dynamic was different, my hair texture, my skin color, the way I spoke, just everything like that was a lot different than the girls and boys around me. So I had gotten home that night and we went to the store and I told my parents, I was like, hey, I want to go on this diet. And my parents were like super supportive just because they thought that it would be like good for me because I wanted to do it. My acting coach told me to do it. And so, yeah, they took me to the store. We got all of the stuff. And then the next day I started and then I came back the following week and I told her how much weight I lost and she was very excited for me and happy for me and praised me and celebrated me and I was like, ooh, I like this feeling of validation. I like this feeling of people noticing things I'm doing and being happy for me. So I just took that and just ran with it. I decided that I was going to keep doing that. And I just kept going on multiple diets and I was engaging in a number of disordered behaviors at the same time. It didn't really turn into a full-blown eating disorder until around age 12 or 13, and I was at a new school, again, predominantly white private school. Everyone was, around me was white and thin, and I just wanted to look like them and be like them. So I decided that I was going to conform and try my best to look like them outside of my skin color because that was something that was out of my control. So I decided if I couldn't be white, I was going to be thin. So that's kind of where everything, I guess, really, really got bad. 7th and 8th grade, which were my 2 middle school years, were like the peak of my eating disorder and when it got really, really bad. In 8th grade, I finally came and told my parents, I was like, look, like I'm going through this. It's been really difficult. I think I need to go to therapy. But I don't know if I could do this anymore. So I started going to therapy when I was 14 and I started going to dietitian appointments and doctor appointments, but I still like just wasn't recovering. I didn't want to recover because I still didn't have my ideal body. I still didn't think I was sick enough and I just was very reluctant about not recovering and I was very I guess doing the opposite of what my treatment team wanted me to do and what they thought was best of me. And so the idea of treatment finally came up in November/December of 2019. And that was when I started getting on waiting lists for different treatment centers. And then in March of 2020 was when they told me that I finally had a spot in one. So I was getting ready for treatment. I was getting ready to go and the pandemic hit.
I thought I knew what was coming.
So I didn't end up going. And I had started my account on March 1st. So literally weeks before everything had happened. And I just wanted something to document. And I decided, you know what, like, I'm going to try this. I'm going to see where it goes. And maybe in treatment, I'll shorten my stay or I'll be a little better than I was when I leave. Because I'm going to try to start my own. So I made my account. I linked it to my personal account. I did like the little post where you can post it to your story. And I was like, so I did a thing. And a lot of my friends started following me, a lot of friends who didn't know anything about what was happening for the past like 4 years. And so, yeah, that's kind of how everything started. And I was just documenting my journey. I was talking about the food I was eating, how I was feeling, what recovery looked like for me in that moment. It was never meant to be activism. And it kind of turned into activism December/November of last year.
Mhm. So, given you were sort of in treatment and there's all that sort of private access to, recovery, which is whether we go to a therapist or we go to treatment or we see a dietitian or whatever it might be. And then there's this public aspect of healing, which is all of these accounts on Instagram and blogs and YouTube channels and forums. And, there's this array of community out there, different access points to the community. So, how did you first become aware of the existence of the recovery community? How did you know to kind of make this account and be like, this is something I can do? I can talk about how I'm going and how I'm progressing and share that publicly. How did you come across the recovery community as a concept initially?
Yeah. So I came across the recovery community when I was around 13. And I was just looking up different things on Google and YouTube, and I was an avid Tumblr user.
Me too.
Um, so that's a lot of where I found unhealthy behaviors and different things was Tumblr. So I didn't necessarily find recovery from there, but I was looking up different things on Google and YouTube of like, how do I know I have an eating disorder? What signs and symptoms? Like, and I would watch all these videos and different things. And then I came across your video, which was the picture everyone with an eating disorder should see. I think it was
Mhm.
that one. And I'd watched it and I was like, and that was when I was like dabbling into bulimia. I was like a few months into binging and purging regularly. Um, and so I was like, wow, like I kind of like her. Um, and so I watched that one video and then I remembered your accent and what you looked like, but I could not remember your name for the life of me. I could not remember
He
it. So
pronounces
I
things weird. Does anyone know who I'm talking about?
literally, and so I was just like, I don't know who she is, but I wanna watch her videos again, but I don't know where to find them. So then I just kept watching videos and I was introduced to other recovery advocates, and I just started watching their videos, and then I would go between like watching eating disorder like pro Anna videos, like my eating disorder story, but they like include very specific details that are not helpful.
And photos, nice
Yep.
triggering image slideshow. Yeah, yeah.
Yep, I used to watch those all the time, and then I would go through this period where I was like, maybe I should just like try to recover a little bit, and then I would go back to different accounts, and then I don't know which video it was of yours that just popped up one day, and I was like, oh my gosh, there she is, and so I remember commenting, I was like, oh my gosh, like I remember the first video I ever watched of you, like I remembered your accent, but I couldn't remember your name, and here I am again, and you replied back, and you're like, well, I'm so glad you're here, and I was like, so sweet. Thank you. I was just so happy that someone acknowledged my existence, and I was so happy that someone could look at me as a person and not my eating disorder. Even though no one knew about my eating disorder, I just felt like it was the only thing I had of me. And you obviously didn't know me. I was a complete stranger, but you saw me as a human, and that really, really just like I guess helped me in that moment more than I thought it did.
Mm.
So I was very grateful for that. And then I guess it was like eighth grade or ninth grade. So 2019, 2020 was when I started following people on Instagram and finding the Haze community and the anti-diet movement and intuitive eating. And I was like, whoa, like this is some cool stuff. Like I'm like pretty interested in this. Like this is something I believe in and I like and I want to be a part of. So I was following tons of dietitians, therapists, recovery advocates. Um, and I guess the first thing I ever did that was like something that just really signifies my recovery and when I was introduced to the recovery community is this sticker I have that says diet culture sucks.
Oh, yeah.
And it's from Naomi at Diet Culture Sucks. Love her, so sweet. And I bought it from her, and that was the first, like, I guess, time I was really feeling that I could advocate for the issues that were important to me, such as the anti-diet movement and intuitive eating and health at every size.
Mm. So, given, like I said, you started recovering at a time when there was this wealth of community out there, which on one hand can be so positive because, like you said, people inherently understand you. We didn't know each other, right? We would have passed each other in the street and I would have gone, oh, I think like from a little profile picture, is that girl from the comment section, right? We don't know each
Mhm.
other, but we inherently immediately understand something about each other that the people closest to us may not understand. So there's this immediate
Yeah.
validation and connection. And where there is responsible content, that is so powerful, because like you said, it feels like this whole world opens up to you, that there's other people who think like I do and see what I can see, which maybe can't be seen by my nearest and dearest. And, having conversations with loved ones where they're just sort of spouting off diet culture beliefs, and it just can feel so invalidating and so disconnecting and so isolating. And it doesn't help to have them backing up some of your eating disorder self-thought. So here's this whole world online where people are just immediately going, I get it. And, we're all on the same page. We're all heading in the same direction. And then there's the elements of online recovery community content, or, uh, accounts online, which aren't necessarily really irresponsible, but it's a bit gray area, like the My Eating Disorder Story videos that you're talking about, where it really is just a slideshow of triggering images, which make people more prone to compare their own bodies. And that whole sick enough line kind of plays in your head, looking at these images and thinking, well, my eating disorder has never looked like that. So is it really valid? Am I really sick enough? So from your position as someone recovering in an already established recovery community, what do you think are the positives and the negatives as far as your experience that either helped you or were red flags to you that kind of hindered your progress? What are the positives and the negatives, the pros and the cons?
Yeah, definitely. When it comes to positives, I realized that I there were some people that looked like me. There weren't many, but there were more than I was seeing in my life at home and in my community and in my schools. So that was definitely a really positive thing for me. And then also seeing people on the other side. Some of my favorite accounts, like Dr. Colleen Richmond and Jennifer Rodlin, like those are people on the other side that did deal with their eating disorders, and that was very, very like inspirational to me. And it's like so crazy to me now because those are like some of my friends, like people I talk to like on a regular basis, which is like crazy, again, a full circle moment. And so that was like really, really positive for me. And then seeing people and their different perspectives and their different recovery journeys, because obviously you've said this before, but there's no one that has the same recovery journey or the same exact eating disorder experience as another person. So that was very beneficial to me, seeing all different types of marginalized groups that I didn't even know existed, and didn't even know went through eating disorders, just like people of color and things like that. And just the whole learning experience, like I think going to therapy and going to dietitian appointments and doctor appointments is like very valuable, but it's not accessible to everyone. And you the same knowledge on eating disorders is on the internet too. And so when I see other accounts talking about that and their lived experiences, I think that's just as valuable, but a more accessible resource, as opposed to going to therapy. And I think therapy is beneficial and so helpful, but it's not accessible to everyone. And sometimes if you're not with an eating disorder professional that doesn't have lived experience or doesn't know anything about eating disorders, it can be a lot more harmful than it can helpful. So seeing those lived experiences and seeing people on the other side was definitely something that was super beneficial and helpful to my recovery. And just being able to have a voice and share my experiences where there was really little to no judgment. And yeah, so that was on the really, really positive side. And then the negative side is people sharing lots of before and afters. We see a lot of still
Mm-hmm.
what I eat in a days and
Mm-hmm.
exercise routines and just different things in this recovery community. And that those were things that were just like extremely unhelpful to me. Seeing even I like when my account was like at 50 followers, I think I did like one what I eat in a day, and thankfully someone told me like, hey, that's not like helpful, and I was like, thank you, I will never do this again. So I haven't done it again, and that was like over a year ago. Again, my following was very small, so I'm glad I hope I didn't like trigger anyone. But yeah, so things like that just not helpful. And then also people invalidating other people's experiences. I see a lot of eating disorder recovery accounts like jumping on people when we're talking about fat positivity and fat acceptance and how thin white women should not be the face of those two movements. And a lot of people get mad about that and very defensive, and they think that like like their struggles just as valid and they should be talked about, but there's a time and a place and they should not be the face for marginalized groups. And that's something I wholeheartedly believe. And a lot of people believe that. But we're being told that we're wrong and that we're invalidating the experience, that we're saying that only fat people can deal with body dysmorphia and insecurities and things like that. And that's like, no, not at all. And things
Mm.
like that. So those are negative sides. But in my experience, it's been a lot more positive than it has negative.
Yeah. And from my perspective, as someone who's watched it develop and grow over 7 years, I mean, it's wild to me that, you know, it's such a prolific community now, because I had to go searching for it. I didn't know anyone in my real life who spoke about having an eating disorder. And back then, Jalissa, this was 7 years ago, we didn't even have the word influencer back then. Like we didn't have a term for, you know, people on the internet making a career out of being on the internet. So that's how long ago
Yeah.
it was, having to go looking for connection and community and for representation of even just eating disorders at all, let alone these very important nuanced representations from different backgrounds and different abilities and different gender identities. It was really just looking for anything which told you, I get it, I hear you, I see you. And so it's incredibly comforting to me to see this growing community. I have a lot of people ask me, like, do you think it's bad? And they want me to talk about how bad it is. And I'm like, well, everything's got its pros and its cons, right?
Yeah.
And the eating disorder recovery community online has so much potential for good and so much potential for, as you said, reaching people who may not have any other access to community understanding, treatment, therapy, all the rest of it, which might just keep them afloat until maybe hopefully they can access treatment or some level of help. I think the danger is that eating disorders are so complex, right? As you said, that,
Hmm.
you know, there's these certain areas like before and after photos, what I eat in a day, is which for the general population is not really an area of concern. For the
Yeah.
eating disorder sufferer population, I think the policy is better safe than sorry, right?
Yeah.
So we have a lot
Hmm.
of these debates about what's safe and what isn't. And I think it's better to sort of listen to the majority and try to keep everyone as safe as possible. So where it might help
Exactly.
some, if it's hindering most, let's just pump the brakes on it, right? Let's listen to the community, most crucially,
Yeah.
right?
Definitely. I 100% agree.
Yeah. So, what is lacking in the recovery community as far as how we help and reach and represent and support marginalized groups? Because I've had the privilege of watching your advocacy and activism evolve in the recovery space. And this seems to be a really particularly important point and area of activism for you, for such understandable reasons, given what you've detailed for us about how your eating disorder even developed, that there wasn't even just general representation of people who you could see yourself in, and the pressure to belong, right? And to feel like you had to fit this mold that was really invalidating to your own identity, right? So then
Yeah.
to see that, as we do in the recovery community, that there's a pretty dominant narrative, there's a fairly dominant image. I know that I am a contributor to the stereotype. Very aware. And that we need to, you know, be able to uh, have a more nuanced representation. So, from your perspective, what is lacking in our community as far as reaching, supporting, and representing marginalized groups?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think something that's very complex and not talked about enough. I think amplifying those voices and acknowledging your privilege is so powerful. Just like posting something from like on your story, even like that's like a small step that's so easy. Like when I made my people of color eating disorder post and I reached out to people to share it because I was like, this is something that's not talked about enough. So I'd really appreciate if you could share it. And lots of people did, and I was very thankful for that, and that's where I got a lot of my audience. So amplifying those voices, because those voices are already there, like we're already in the community, we're already posting on Instagram, we're already doing those things, but we're not being recognized and we're not being seen because the people with the most privilege and the most followers aren't amplifying our voices. Like I know I haven't been in the community for like 7 years or 5 years or whatever. Like I've been in here for barely a year, but it took almost 11 months for my account to actually like get recognition. And when I say recognition, I don't mean like followers or anything. I couldn't care less about that, but I do mean like other people that look like me. Like my feed was so white before I was amplified. And then I was amplified and then I found all these people that looked like me and I was like, where did these people come from? Like, and I was looking back at their posts and everything, and I was like, these people have been here for years
Mm.
and they don't have nearly the followers, nearly the influence as someone who is white and thin and cisgender and straight and all of that, like that fits that mold. And so we're already here. We just need to be amplified. We just need to be listened to. And that's one of the most important things because our content getting shared is one of the most powerful things because people like with the most privilege and with the most followers, they have people of color who follow them, whether they acknowledge it or not. And that might be a very small number, that might be a very large number. And so when I had a post about this a while ago, but your BIPOC followers see when you're only posting and amplifying white voices. Like we see it and it it affects us. And whether white influencers believe that or not, like they're not the ones that get to dismiss our perspective and say that no, like I do enough. It's like you really don't though.
Mm.
And I see that a lot. I see a lot of people talking about Black lives and things like that when it's trending. And I just wish that could be a yearly thing,
Mm.
not in the summer, not in when we see another innocent Black life being taken. Like, can you just do that all year long? Can you amplify those voices all year long? Can you be on mute for a little bit while you're amplifying those voices? Like, it's not something that should be last a day, a year. I mean, oops, said that wrong. That's not something that should last a day, a week, a month. It's something you should actively be doing if you're going to call yourself an activist or an advocate or an ally. That's something you need to actively be doing because our lives and our skin color isn't something that lasts for a day or a year or a week. It's here forever, just like your activism should be. So I think amplifying the voices is the most important thing when we get into that. And then just acknowledging your privilege and staying and not speaking over us. When you see Black lives talking, you shouldn't be trying to grab the mic and be like, okay, I am going to talk about it now and how I feel as a white person. That's centering yourself on the conversation that has nothing to do with you and doesn't affect you. It affects us, and we should be the ones speaking.
Mm.
So I think centering yourself and your privilege is just very, very harmful and something that no advocate, ally, activists should be doing with a topic that you can't relate to and you never have been able to relate to.
Yeah, I find it. I think you're right in that we saw a lot of amplification in sort of a month, 6 week long period after the murder of George Floyd last year, and a lot of what was coming from marginalized groups was great. Now this needs to be a mindset change, not you need
Exactly.
someone to lose their life in horrific circumstances to motivate you. This should be motivation enough for a mindset shift that you need to be having very diverse conversations with very diverse people, so that
Yeah.
things like this are not repeated, right? It's got to be consistent action and consistent change, and accepting and acknowledging that when it comes to speaking on marginalized experiences, like as a white privileged person, you just don't have that much to say. There's just, even if you wanted to take the mic, what are you going to talk about? What on earth could you possibly have to say
Exactly.
that has more value or more importance than someone who's actually living that experience? Um,
Mhm.
and it kind of takes the pressure off you just to be like, pass the mic, give somebody else the chance to talk, give somebody else the chance to you know uh, speak to their experience and to educate not only yourself but your following. I'm always so grateful to anyone from any background on any topic who's willing to come on the channel or who's willing to come on the podcast, because it even takes pressure off me. It's like, great, here's this whole other experience and all these other lessons that these people can learn. So it's a gift to everyone, and an incredibly generous thing that we're even asking people from marginalized groups to do, to be in this position where we're even asking them to be educated and to share their experience. They're not obligated to do that for us,
Mhm.
in those of us in
Yeah.
privileged positions. So to do it in a way that's genuine and gracious and not putting the obligation on them, but to say, here's, if you would like to come and take the platform from me for a bit, fantastic. But obviously no obligation, because that can be a bit of an issue too, right? Where it's like, we're all ignorant. Can you please come and teach us all how to be better? It's like, we've been doing that for how long? Like, we need a rest sometimes, right?
Exactly. Yeah, 100%. I say this all the time, and I think something I'm gonna coin. But like, you shouldn't expect marginalized voices to be your walking encyclopedia.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we are not the only form of education you should be learning from and trying to get from, because it's not our responsibility, it's not our job to educate you. And I remember commenting on a post of a mixed POC, and she was talking about how like, stop calling us exotic, stop asking us to touch like our hair, and
Mm-hmm.
we don't owe you anything, like, we don't owe you an explanation of what we are and things like that. And I had commented like, I don't understand why people think this is appropriate in any setting. I think it needs to stop. And someone replied back to me, um and they were like, well, how else are we going to learn if you guys aren't educating us? And I was like, babe, your white privilege is speaking, your ignorance is speaking. Like, I was like, what? And then I was like, there are so many free resources.
They're
And she's
already
like,
out
well,
there.
literally, like, all you have to do is like Google is like your best friend on this. You can buy a book for $20 or less. Like, it's, I probably have more books in my bookshelf about white fragility and womanism and how white feminism excludes women of color than most white people. And
Mm-hmm.
that's like something that, like, even I'm still educating myself on things I've lived through my entire life. And so there's no excuse for any white person not to be doing the same.
Mm-hmm.
And so the person was like, well, when we Google things, you guys accuse us of being wrong and ignorant. And I'm like, maybe it's because you are. Like, so it's just just a version of that us versus them mentality and being stuck in this old mindset. It's like, it's outdated, it's wrong, it's harmful, it's hurting us every single day. If our lives being taken is not enough for you, then I don't know what is.
Yeah.
Like,
And as you said, there's so many free resources. Go and look at, and that's, so much of what I started doing is I wouldn't go to a person I was following and say, who should I follow? I'd just go and look at who they were following and then look at their story highlights. What were some resources they'd already recommended, or a book they'd talked about that they loved that really spoke to this area. And I go and say, or a podcast, or, something that was really accessible. I couldn't, because look, I do understand on the other side what it is like to be inundated with messages and questions all the time. So that can be irritating in and of itself. But when it's the same stuff, which is basically somebody saying, I haven't taken the time to actually learn about marginalized groups or learn about your experience, and now can you actually help me learn about this thing which is hurtful and painful to you? It's like, oh, we're missing the mark in a big way there.
yeah, 100%. Yeah, and that's the problem.
Yeah. So we've kind of touched on how we can remedy that, what's important, how we diversify, how we amplify, how we go seeking education without putting the burden of responsibility on marginalized groups. But speaking of, because obviously your account is such a powerful one, who were some of those people that you found as your platform grew and as your education expanded? If you could go back and speak to Jalissa like 2 years ago, who would you tell her to follow? What would you tell her to read?
Yeah, oh my gosh, that's such a good question. I would definitely tell her to follow The Friend I Never Wanted. I love
Yes.
Nia.
Yes.
Oh my God, I love
Chef
Nia.
kiss.
You're your Latina nutritionist,
Yep.
great. Another source, especially being a Hispanic woman of color. I'm also mixed with Black, so I can kind of relate to both of those experiences. Um, the Celestial RD, Brianna, I think, yeah, Brianna. The Nutrition Tea, and just some other accounts that are around my age, like seeing teenagers actively advocate for the same issues I do, would be
Mhm.
This Is Not Your Trend. I love Eleni. She's one of my closest friends on Instagram. Alex Food Freedom, love her. Nutrition by SA. Those are like 7 of my favorite accounts that are one ran by all people of color. Oh, and Benjamin O'Keefe, he's great. So
Amazing. And like I said, people can go and find someone like Jalissa or someone from a marginalized background and go and look at who they're following,
yeah.
because that's who they're identifying with and also learning from, and that will help you to expand who you're looking at. And I think it's so important for recovery too, that we're looking at all kinds of people from all kinds of backgrounds, gender identities, all kinds of experiences, all kinds of eating disorder diagnoses or non-diagnoses, all kinds of bodies that people uh, are recovering into, I think is so key. We know that people who do this body image work, the unpacking fat phobia work, which is so tied to and rooted in racism, right? Fat phobia and
Mhm.
racism are
And white
so interlinked,
supremacy.
right?
Yep.
Uh, we know that people who do that work recover so much more solidly and kind of are less prone to relapse. So, unpacking all of this stuff is not just contributing to a more informed, hopefully more inclusive world, but it's actually going to help you to solidify some really important lessons in your own recovery.
100%. Yeah. When I started learning about white supremacy and how it was tied to fat phobia and diet culture and how they were all intersectional, that really, really like changed my recovery and the way I viewed my recovery and others' recovery and the different behaviors they were engaging in and what I was engaging in. I mentioned that my activism didn't really turn into activism until like 4 or 5 months ago. And that was like one of the big reasons. And I was like, hey, I need to start advocating for this. Like, this is something I go through. And something that's so important for me on my account is that I make those complex topics digestible and something you
Yes.
can read and understand. And that's something that people tell me a lot I'm good at, which I really appreciate because that's something I strive so hard for. And things like capitalism and different stuff like that that we're not hearing about on major news sources and in our history classes and things like that, are things you can find, and you can find them to be digestible. And I think that's something that's not really talked about enough or seen because we just kind of, I guess, expect people to be as woke as us. But that's not the case in most circumstances. And I think there's a fine line between educating someone on everything and then just offering a digestible resource that is accessible to everyone and easy to read.
Yeah, I think that you're doing a phenomenal job. Like I said, it's been a real privilege
Thank you.
to see your own recovery turn into this amazing, as you say, resource for people to really expand their thinking about so many topics that go beyond recovery, right? And if I can
Yeah.
say I am proud of having seen your progress. I mean, if it's completely your accomplishment and you should be so proud of it, but it's been a real joy to watch from my position as someone who hasn't been in that headspace for 7 years. And so to watch someone go through their own recovery and then take up that space and take up their own sense of empowerment, right, to talk about these things they're so passionate about is really really wonderful to see. So I'm so, so proud of how
Yeah.
far you've come and what you're doing. You're such an important voice in this community. And where can people come and find your amazing work? Where can
You
people
can
come and
find
connect?
you can find me at Julissa's Recovery, and that is spelled JULISSAS and then dot recovery. We have a great time over there. I love being over there. My stories are where we have the most fun. My Instagram stories, I do polls and different questions and just show different things going on in my life all the time. My feed's a little more like serious and put together. But yeah, so that's where you can find me. I love being over there. If you want to chat or talk to me and let me know how you're doing, I would love that. And I love making new friends. So I'm always open to chat with anyone.
Amazing. And so grateful for you to come and speak to us today has been really wonderful and generous, and I really appreciate it. I'm sure people will get a lot out of our chat. All of your information will be in the show notes and the YouTube video description box as well. But I can't wait to see what you're going to do going forward and what's in store for you next. Thank you so much, Jalissa.